Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to New Victory Gardening. This week, I got some just random garden chores, and so I thought we'd run through those and maybe I'd tell a story or two. It's the middle of July, and so it's getting right into that great part of summer where everything's producing. So I have an apple tree here, and it's ready to produce, and we've already harvested my nectarine tree, and I have a plum as well. I have a grafted tree that has plums, nectarines, and apricots, and so it's about to fall over with plums. And we just did shallots, and you saw garlic, and so it's really a great time of year to be to have a garden and to be in a gardening mindset, I guess I'll say. We really don't have to go to the grocery store this time of year. And so that kind of gets to the point I was going to start off today's video with is, why New Victory Gardening, and why make the consideration for self-sufficiency or the ability to produce some of your own food wherever you are, right? And I think it goes back to a story that my mother always tells. She tells it over and over again. It's about her grandmother, who is my great grandmother. And they were folks who moved out from Oklahoma to California, and they ended up in Los Angeles, California. And what's significant about that generation is it's the generation that went through the Great Depression. And so you ask yourself a question, if the Great Depression in America in the 30s, 20s, 30s, if it was so bad, how did poor people survive? How did people who didn't have a lot of opportunities or led simple lives, how did they survive in hard times? And so my mom always talked about my great grandparents, her grandparents, and used them as an example. And so this was the time right before the Second World War, right, where New Victory Gardening gets its theme and ties to history as victory gardens during World War II, right, and that whole mindset and theme of gardening that I think very much is resurfaced now. And so anyway, they were living very modestly. They had a small home with a little bit of land on it, but they had paid their mortgage off. And so say you have an 800 square foot home with, a main room, a couple bedrooms and a bathroom, but you own it outright. Your expenses are much lower. And she always said that my great grandmother kept a garden. And so she would do a little bit of work in that garden every single day. And she was also the longest lived of my great grandparents. She made it to around 90 years old. And so it's a great thought in linking and tying back to your own family members who went through it and asking simple questions. And so when the stock market crashed and the economy was going down and there were long lines because the value of the dollar basically tanked, and simple things that you would take for granted all of a sudden became very expensive. She always said that the folks who were resilient and who had their own gardens, who had a way of producing some of their own meat, and who bought things in bulk and knew how to survive, that downturn wasn't nearly as hard on them. And in a lot of ways, their lives just continued on the way they had been to that point. And so now, fast forward, it's 2024. We have a whole new set of circumstances. We didn't have a stock market crash. We didn't have a war. And hopefully we won't have one anytime soon. But I tell you, it has been the hottest time period since I've been alive in California, basically, these last 3 weeks. We've sustained just higher temperatures than I ever remember seeing in my life. And so being ready for those challenges, giving you that can-do mindset, and the thought that you can do things, you can take care of your own welfare, you can produce some of your own food, you can be ready in simple everyday tasks. is kind of a theme that my wife and I came about for this channel. And it really is paying homage to my great grandmother and that story that my mom always told. And so with that, it's an evening after work, and it's a beautiful evening now. The weather's actually cooled quite a bit and right in time for harvesting to begin. Why don't we walk around the garden? There's a few things I need to do and diagnose, and we'll wrap the video. Enjoy. So I thought I'd get some blackberries. Here they are. That's not all of them, but when they get ripe like this, oh my goodness, let's see if you can see them. They're just so good. Oh my, they have just such a wonderful aroma. When they're super ripe, they like push their seeds out, so they're not as seedy. They're just juicy and delicious. And I have to fight the animals off from them, the birds and stuff. How you know they're good is when after you harvest them, your hands will be covered in blackberry juice, right? To me, that's a rite of passage. So in my middle bed, I've been resting this bed. What I found is that I had disease problems, and if I rest the bed, if I just rest one of them every year, the disease problems go away. And it's kind of like a way of solarizing. I don't know if you all have heard of solarizing, but you basically let the bed go bone dry, and then you wrap it in plastic, and you let the sun heat it up and heat it and basically cook it for at least a month, most likely more like 2 or 3. And it kills out a lot of harmful things that might be in the soil. And so when I started resting my beds, I got the same effect. So I'm growing most of the garden, but I'm not growing all of it. And so this mulch needs to be piled up. But I wanted to show this little weed here. This weed, one summer, about maybe 5 years ago, I had a really bad infestation of this weed, and it actually killed one of my summer gardens. So they grew up so thick that they choked out a couple of my beds, and this stuff has been here ever since. And it hitched a ride in on cheap manure. So I went to a big box store, stores you might recognize, and I purchased fertilizer in the form of cow manure, steer manure, cow manure. And it was the cheap stuff. And I thought I was saving money, but in actuality, I ended up paying just a whole lot more because I had to deal with this weed. This weed is so, how do I put it? It's so hardy and invasive that it can grow up and choke something out. Like, let's put it this way. There was a year that I had put row covers down. So I had put those plastic row covers down, and I had also used cloth row covers. And this weed grew underneath those row covers, pushed them up, made it through cracks and crevices in it, got some sunlight on it, and overcame those row coverings. So unless you're using like the most robust row coverings out there, some of these weeds, they're just so strong that they can even overcome that. And so you see here, I'm not nearly worried because weeds are challenging. They can destroy your crops, but at the same time you can overcome them. And learning how to, I think, is a part of making yourself a more resilient gardener. And so I've kind of seeded and hinted how I overcame this infestation, because at the time I was overwhelmed. Like I thought that I might have to dig out the soil or burn or not grow for a whole summer, whatever it may be. But actually what helped the most is putting you guys back on the stand. What helped the most is mulch. So when I started mulching into my beds, and getting the mulch piled up high enough, right, to create a good soil environment. Get the mulch piled up high, and you know, keep an adequate soil moisture. You will suffocate those plants. So they suffocate out and they died, and I didn't have to worry about them. Here's what's left on my allium, or my onions I should say. The garlic you saw we harvested. I did the shallots. The shallots harvested about 1 month after, and I just stopped watering them for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And I just let them finish, and then I came and harvested them out. It was a pretty good harvest, and so I have these green onions left, and so we love green onions. And there's a trick I'm going to show you about how to get your green onions to grow really easy, to get them to sprout, because sometimes it's hard to sprout green onions. And also I'm going to give you a trick to make your green onions grow really big. Like if you like to roast green onions, or grill them I should say, there's a trick you can do with them to get really big green onions so that they do that well, or you get a good harvest of green onions that you know, just taste good and that have grown to a good size, not a super small size. And so stay tuned. I'll show that later in the season. You have to watch for it. All right. All right, so here we are, my other bed, and I promise we'll get to the pot garden, which is supposed to be my simple everyday every person garden right here next. But this year has been interesting because I think spraying with Castile soap, so the peppermint Castile soap, regularly has just greatly improved kind of like my patch of greens. And so it's held at bay. Cabbage loopers, the aphids are not really haven't really been that big of an issue here. And you know, I think I even was able to run that bird away that was dining on my garden. And so a lot of times what I do, which, you know, you have to do what you have to do, but a lot of times I end up you know, in the summertime I just lose the harvest because my leaves will be just covered with aphids and eaten up by cabbage loopers. And so I just kind of wait for the hottest months to go by. And once the hottest months have gone by, you know, I trim out the plants a bit and I just allow them to regrow in the fall season. And in the fall season, all those bugs are a lot less. There's a lot fewer. And, you know, I can begin harvesting them again in fall, right before the holidays. But this summer, I got enough, and it's been good, that I can go ahead and continue to harvest mid-July and hopefully into August, and the bugs won't overwhelm me. And so I'll do it. Give me just a second here to harvest them. I think I'm gonna speed it up to 2 times. Oh, you're gonna have to watch me harvest. But I tell you, before I do that, it is a little bit irritating when this had never happened to me before, but now I get leaves like this, where you can see very clearly that the top of this leaf has just been torn off by something. And that's why I say, besides the bird feces I'm seeing in my garden as evidence that birds have been visiting and eating my collard greens. I have this new type of bird, I guess, visiting that likes to eat greens, and I never had to deal with that before. But all in all, I think the soap makes the greens taste bad, and so the bird has greatly slowed down eating. And so that's good, because now I have more greens that I can harvest. What I'm going to do with these is basically take them in, triple wash them, and blanch them. So put them in boiling water for a minute or less, blanch them, and then I'm going to put them in a bag, a freezer bag basically, and seal them and put them in the freezer. And I don't know about you, but come Thanksgiving, you know, greens can be pretty expensive around the holidays. I think folks know that greens are something popular with a lot of groups around. And so, you know, you get, you know, how much money of greens am I holding here? It's almost like around Thanksgiving, this is $30 worth of greens or something. And I have it right here in the garden, so might as well harvest it out. I'm gonna do the same with the kale. Oh, my kale plants. Nothing's going to seed, so that's good. Sometimes the heat can cause them to go to seed, but these are all doing good. And so I planted a lot of different varieties, and it looks like all of the varieties have done well. So I have a red kale, I have a normal green curly leaf or curly edge kale, and I have lacinato or dinosaur kale, and they're all doing good this year. So that's a blessing. So one final note before we go and before I end this episode, which I think I rambled too much today, but you know, on a nice evening, I just can't think of what I would rather do than to enjoy a garden and to talk about gardening with folks who might be interested. And you know, if you want to leave comments only make things better. And so I recommend, please participate, leave me a comment. Go to the website, check it out, leave a comment there. You know, the goal is growing the concept of this resiliency, this independence, and this stress relief that we call gardening. Not to mention it's good food. And so what I noticed was a smell. And the smell, it smelled like maybe rotten egg, but not quite that strong. And so as I watered my plants, I noticed a smell. And so a lot of times you can use all your senses when you're gardening, and they can help you. And so in these pots, by now you have to realize I didn't really plant these very well. I planted them too fast. I didn't think about it very good. I've also had to make some changes. And so you say, wow, you know, pot gardening, well, you know, if you mess it up, you can still actually get a summer of good harvesting if you plant the right plants. And then you just make some adjustments. And so I'm going to make another adjustment in the pot garden, because as you can see now, it just, hey, maybe I could have done a better job of planting in pots this year. And so I noticed this smell, and I smelled around, I guess you would say, smelled around until I found where it was coming from, and I looked at the situation, and so I want to try to do one remedy to end this video and to keep my stuff going. So you see these plants here have not been affected. This is the pot. So this pot right here is the pot, and the plants have not been affected. They're healthy. I was able to get the harlequin beetles, or they're not beetles, the harlequin stink bugs out of them, and I was able to keep aphids off of them. And so the plants have just grown in their little pot environment, and they're happy now. And so that's good. But what the smell was is a planning mistake on my part, or an oversight, I guess I'll say. And what it was a lot of times you put holes in the bottom of a pot so that water can drain through and out that pot. So you soak the pot, and then the water goes down and slowly trickles out of the bottom. So that way the water doesn't pool up, because it could kill your plant if you don't have drainage through your pots, right? And so what the oversight was that your roots can also grow out of those holes. So you can plant plants that have an elaborate root system that ends up growing down through the hole you made and out, and causing other issues. And so what gardeners do is they maybe put a little piece of like landscape fabric, or some people maybe put a little bit of like gravel or rock in the bottom. Some other people use maybe a metal, like a little wire mesh metal, galvanized metal piece, all to keep your roots in your pot. Or you can make, like I did in this pot here, just really small holes. So I made a bunch of, 1/8 or 1/16 holes that the water can still drain out of slowly, but that the roots won't go through, right? In this instance, I have one big center hole, and the roots grew out quite elaborately. And so let's see if I can show you And the only way that I had known that that had happened was by the smell, because as the roots grew and spread underneath the pot, they used up all the air, all the oxygen, and that's the root of the smell. The root of the smell was that the pot underneath was becoming unhealthy. So there it is. It's grown into a nice mat, and I think it's part of the reason why these plants are so happy. It's because they were able to send their roots out broader and take advantage of the water that I'm putting in the pot for longer. So it's not draining out and they're only restricted to the pot, but now they can also be along the base of the pot. But that smell is a problem. And so I'm going to execute just an easy remedy. That way I don't have to cut those roots off. I want the plants to use the roots. I just want air to be able to get to them. And hopefully that'll allow me to harvest this all the way through the summer season and into fall. And it's a simple fix. So I have some bricks here, right? And I am going to take my bricks and I'm going to set my bricks where I want this pot to go. So that way, now my pot is setting up on bricks. Air is able to get through and under, and my water can still drain through and out. And if I need, I can take and I can trim the roots very gently. Those small roots are where a plant makes its money, right? And so I can trim very gently if needed, kind of to keep the roots from getting too bad or going a place where they don't need to go. Or if they get unhealthy, I can just trim them back a lot further. But my goal is to keep these plants healthy, if at all possible. And so this is a quick, easy fix that'll keep me growing and keep me harvesting this plant for the foreseeable future. And so yet another garden adjustment. We'll keep learning through this pot garden, and I think I'll wrap it up with what I learned in my poorly planted pot garden and use it as tips for the future. So anyway, with that, thank you guys for your time. I really appreciate each and every person who watches my videos. I don't do this for work. I do this because it's a passion, and I'm looking to engage with folks in the community. And so please consider subscribing if you like what you see. Please leave me a comment or a note, and I'll do my best to respond whenever I can grab a minute and to give you a thoughtful response. And I will see you all in the next video.